start time, then I thought it would take a while for people to the murmurs to settle. So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. I'm Tiffany Balducci, and I'm president of Durham Region Labor Council, and I'll also be your MC this evening for this informative and interactive event. So let's start kind of by seeing, I see a lot of new faces in the room, which is really exciting. So I just want to see, with a show of hands, is there anyone here who's a worker at General Motors or a retiree here? So we have a lot of folks. Yeah, a round of applause. Do we have any workers here from the education or healthcare sectors? Great, yeah, good to see you here. What about manufacturing or retail? Any workers here with manufacturing or retail? Yeah, all right, some shy hands going there. Welcome, welcome. Other public sector workers that I didn't name, like municipal or university, Canada Post, for example. There we go. And then other private sector workers that I didn't name already, feel free to put your hand up. Thank you so much. And then any community or coalition advocates or activists in the room here as well. Way to go. Thank you for spending your time here. Anyone didn't get a chance to raise their hand? You just want to raise their hand for fun? Way to go. Thank you for being here. Appreciate that. I'd like to just recognize the team of organizers who it's been a pleasure to help plan this event. And if you just want to give a little wave, some of them you'll be hearing from later. Tony, Leah. James Hutt. Corey here. Russ, and Jesse Forbes. I'd also like to mention that we're joined this evening by Dar Dowling and her documentary crew, so we're very excited about that. We're also live streaming the event, so just be mindful of this area right here. There's cords and live streaming happening, so it's great for people who can't make it in person. Hi to you at home or wherever you are. I'd like to recognize the sponsors of this event, Unifor 222 Political Action Committee, Durham Region Labor Council, CPW, yeah, you can keep the applause going, Unifor Environmental Council, Delivering Community Power, Atkinson and Decent Work Project, and the Canadian Workers Co-op Federation, and the Center for Social Justice. So a very great group. Thank you very much. So I'd also just like to begin. Can everyone hear me okay? Or is the sound okay? We were having, one of the reasons for the slight delay was, these things always happen where everything's working perfectly and then all of a sudden right before the event you have, sound difficulties, but that's okay, we'll work with it. So we will begin this event by acknowledging that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, as we gather here, there have been Aboriginal peoples who have been the stewards of this place. In particular, we recognize that this is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nations. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our province and country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across our country. I'd also like to take a quick moment of silence for, those that we've lost recently, and also in recognition of April 28th, the day of mourning that's coming up. We will be having an event in Oshawa at the Parquet at City Hall at noon on Sunday, but if we could just take a moment of silence to reflect on those that we've lost. And stand if you're able. Thank you. Thank you. And one of our keynote speakers this year at our day of mourning is actually a worker at GM, Mike Unifor, who is speaking of the health impacts of GM leaving Oshawa and the mental health impacts and the impacts on the health of Oshawa in general that it will have in the connection to the day of mourning. So it'll be an important topic of conversation then. When General Motors announced that they were closing their plant in Oshawa, it was devastating news for the workers, their families, and our entire community. Even after GM received $10.8 billion in public handouts, General Motors has decided to throw thousands of people out of work. Oshawa deserves better. The Green New Deal is a plan to create millions of jobs while taking on climate change, building stronger communities, and tackling inequities. What could this kind of transformation look like in Oshawa? What could it mean for Canada Post, with the largest vehicle fleet in the country? That's what we'll be discussing tonight, unexplored alternatives and how we can nationalize GM under democratic workers and communities control while implementing a Green New Deal for Oshawa. That was great. Like, I love it when the claps happen on their own. And it makes my job much easier, I must tell you. The agenda for the evening is that we will hear from various esteemed speakers who you see here and who I will be telling you more about just in a moment. And then there will be a chance for Q&A, as well as some group discussion with your tables. Then we'll hear back from you and have a call to action and follow and have a wrap up. So it's all up there. As an MC, I take my role as keeping time very seriously. So I told all the speakers about their time, and also when we do questions, I'll also be taking that very seriously as well. And because I know everyone has given up their evening to be here away from their family or their pets or their favorite TV show. I don't know if there's any sporting event on tonight, but we really appreciate your time and we want to be efficient with it. And so we did want to show has anyone here seen the movie, the short, the 7.5-minute film written by Naomi Klein and Molly Crabapple, produced by Abby Lewis, and it's narrated by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the future of what the Green New Deal future could look like. Has anyone seen that video? Yeah, the message from the future. So we wanted to show that, but the sound on the laptop's not working right now. What I could do is try to hold the microphone up to that, or we could just move on to the speakers, and I could just encourage you to watch the video on your own, and then, okay, we'll do that. Thank you for working with me on that. But it's in collaboration with The Intercept. It's called The Message from the Future, and I encourage you to check it out. And see what has some ideas in there. Some you may agree with and some you may disagree with, and that's what we're here to discuss. So we'll just get right into the speakers for the evening, if that's good. Great. So I'll do all their bios all at once, so you get to know who they are, and then they'll come up to the podium and give their remarks, and then we'll do questions after all the speakers are together. Is that good? Good. Sure. Great. All right. So. We're joined tonight with Tony Leah, who is a maintenance mechanic currently working the midnight shift in the GM Oshawa paint shop. Tony did his apprenticeship as a maintenance welder in Oshawa and has been an active union member of first the UAW, then the CAW, and now Unifor. Tony has held a number of elected positions over the years, including being on the bargaining committee in 1996. That year, GM workers went on strike for stronger limits on the outsourcing of work. GM tried to break the strike by applying for an injunction to remove 75 dies from the Oshawa fabrication plant and move them to the U.S. Tony helped lead strikers to occupy the plant, which forced GM to back down. And then our next speaker is Dimitri Lascaris, who is a lawyer, journalist, and activist. He graduated from the University of Toronto Faculty of Law in 1991. In 2004, Dimitri joined one of Canada's leading class action law firms, Christianson LLP. In 2012, Dimitri was named by Canadian Lawyer magazine as one of the 25 most influential lawyers in Canada. In July 2016, Dimitri retired from Siskins and the practice of law in order to devote himself to activism and journalism. He is now a correspondent and board member of the Real News Network and the chair of the board of Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. In Canada's 2015 federal election, Dimitri ran for the Green Party of Canada in the riding of London West. He was also served the Justice Critic on the Shadow Cabinet of the Green Party and is currently the Justice Critic in the Shadow Cabinet of the Green Party of Quebec. Thank you for joining us. Our third speaker tonight is Mike Palecek. He is a letter carrier from Vancouver and the National President of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Russ, who has been working with communities, cooperative enterprises, unions, environmental organizations, and private businesses to meet their strategic goals, and has helped launch over 200 cooperatives with a 70% success rate, for which he gives the founders credit. Russ is the creator of the Cooperative Sustainability Scorecard, and in 2003, he received the Cooperative Spirit Award for Outstanding Contribution to the Ontario Cooperative Association. He has volunteered on the OCA's Co-op Development Committee since the 1990s, and is a member of Co-op Zone. As a volunteer in his own community of Campbellford, Russ was the founding president of Aaron Theatre Cooperative and the Campbellford Seymour Community Foundation. He is currently the chair of the Northumberland County Food Policy Council. Thanks for joining us, Russ. And our final speaker of the evening, before we go into Q&A, is our MPP of Oshawa, Jennifer French. So first elected in June 2014, Jennifer French is the MPP representing Oshawa. As a dedicated educator, Jennifer has over 10 years experience teaching in Ontario and abroad. She actively gives back to her community as an advocate for equity and social justice and is invested in community theater and the arts in Oshawa. Jennifer also has a committed record fighting for workers' rights. She has been a member of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario in Durham and has been actively involved with the Ontario Federation of Labour and Durham Region Labour Council. She was our second vice president until she was became the MPP of Oshawa. In her role with her ECFO local team, Jennifer organized the far-reaching campaign against Bill 115 and coordinated with groups across the province to have the legislation repealed. Jennifer works hard to ensure that people have access to good jobs, a strong publicly funded education system, and a voice in their community. She is a strong advocate for the people of Oshawa and is committed to bringing meaningful change to her community. Thank you for joining us, Jennifer. And so Tony will be our first speaker, and Tony has a PowerPoint that we're going to be setting up. But while we're getting that set up, I do want to, something that I neglected in my duties as MC, my housekeeping. I just want to remind folks that to please have your cell phones on silent, if at all, if you're at all able to. And also, step outside if you have to take a phone call. Washrooms are outside the hall and to your right. And also we have cookies outside if you'd like some, and coffee and water. So feel free to do that. We're going to be passing around a sign-in sheet as well, so please put your information on the sign-in sheet so we know who's in the room, and we can keep you posted on future events and that type of thing. So, sure, there's a sign-in sheet there.
There's additional sheets that are available at each table. If you fill them out and drop them off, then we can help to build what we need to.
Sure. Okay, so yeah, if you see a sign-in sheet going around on your table, please fill it out with your information. There might be 2 different versions going around, but we'll work it out for sure. So without further ado, we'll get Tony set up on the PowerPoint here, and let's welcome Tony.
Obviously, I drew the short straw here, and hopefully I'll get done my spiel before Tiffany has to get the hook out and pull me off the stage. I'm going to give you the workers' view of the problem and the solution. And let me just be brief. General Motors is not the solution. General Motors is the problem. That giving corporations unlimited power to do whatever they want is the problem, because they don't act for the public interest, they act for themselves. It's a sad fact that our society, our governments, our media treat corporations like feudal lords. They give them deference and believe that the only way we can get anything is to beg for crumbs. And we certainly don't need governments or even unions that accept this view. It's not true that corporations are benefactors, that they are the job creators. Just the opposite. We don't need governments that think that the way to deal with a corporation like SNC-Lavalin is to, because they have 8,000 employees in the country, that they should be let off the hook when their executives engage in corruption and bribery, instead of putting them in jail. We don't need governments that deal with a problem like the Keystone XL pipeline by giving the Texas-based corporate oil company that owns it $4.5 billion of our money, and then try to expand production in the oil sands, causing extreme damage to our future by increasing global warming. And it's certainly not true that GM has been our benefactor in this community. As our MPP often says, GM didn't build Oshawa, Oshawa built GM. And if they're allowed, after the many years of making incredible profits from this community, from workers in this community, to just walk away, that is a problem. And what is the impact of that? The loss of 5,000 direct jobs, because it's not just the 2,200 people who are GM employees, but the other 3,000 who are involved in the work of assembling vehicles in this community that GM has successfully outsourced to third-party companies, so that if they do leave, GM feels no responsibility to those workers and they get nothing from GM. It's the 25,000 indirect jobs that are based on those jobs and all of the impact that has to the community. And it's the loss of manufacturing capacity in Oshawa and in our country if all of that goes away after it's been built up, not by GM, but by the work of workers and by support from this community. So I've talked about GM's profitability, one of the most profitable corporations in the world. Where do their profits come from? Us. Right? They certainly come from the workers that assemble vehicles for General Motors, not from anywhere else. One quick example, in 2018, GM's profits from North American operations were $10.8 billion US. That's over $14 billion Canadian. Those are the workers that produce that profit. 6,000 workers in Canada, 15,000 in Mexico, 51,000 in the United States. That's 72,000 workers. All of the value that was created that made profit for GM came from those 72,000 workers. So it's simple math that $14.25 billion divided by those 72,000 workers is almost $200,000 apiece. Each and every worker, GM worker in Canada, the United States, and Mexico produced almost $200,000 profit for General Motors in 1 year. They also have benefited from communities that have supported them in so many ways, as we all know here in Oshawa, and from our governments. And when they were in trouble in 2009, $10.8 billion of public money went to GM. And certainly not all of it came back. But the bailout was more than that. Because on top of that, there were incredible concessions that were forced on the GM workers. concessions that were forced on the retirees, and the shameful fact that GM was able to insist that workers hired after that date would start at 60% of the rate of regular workers, and it would take them 11 years doing the same jobs before they would ever reach equal pay. It looks like now they won't. So all of that contributed to GM's profits, and since 2010 they've been making their profits back. They've been making record profits. But have workers in the plant gotten back any of the concessions they gave? Have the retirees gotten back any of the concessions they gave? There's some sitting there, and the new hires have not been treated fairly either. Meanwhile, GM gets to take that money and leave when they decide with all of the money that came from us. We know that those of us working for GM and other people in the community, I think, know that our union, Unifor, has been bargaining to try to maintain some jobs within the Oshawa facility. There should be some announcement of the result of those negotiations by May the 3rd. But we know from what we've been told that whatever will be achieved will be a small number of jobs. It will be hundreds of jobs, not thousands of jobs, and it will be centered in the stamping plant, which is part of the Oshawa complex. There's incredible technology and equipment that's been built up over the years in the Oshawa complex because of the work of the workers here and the support of the community. What is going to happen to all of that productive capacity, that manufacturing capacity, which is so important to our community and our country? What's going to happen to the thousands of other jobs that aren't saved by that bargaining with GM? Just to give you a sense of what is in that complex, the buildings outlined in black are the buildings of the Oshawa complex. The stamping facility is outlined in red. That's what might be saved for the future, but everything else will be sitting idle, or will be rusting away, or will be bulldozed for condos. Things which are not to the benefit of this community, certainly not to the workers who are working there now, and definitely not for the jobs that our community needs in the future. And General Motors is already taking inventory of the equipment there that they can sell off. That's their plan. We can't allow that. That is why the retirees chapter of Local 222 put forward this resolution calling for the nationalization of General Motors. Be it resolved that unless GM guarantees to maintain the current number of jobs in Oshawa, it should be nationalized without compensation, because we've already paid for it. Democratic workers and community control in order to save productive union jobs and benefit the city of Oshawa and the region of Durham. And after the retirees took that bold step, the membership meeting of Local 222 passed the same resolution, and the Labor Council, Durham Region Labor Council, representing the rest of the working class in this region, passed that resolution. And it caused a lot of excitement, because this is the kind of bold thinking that is needed if we're going to make progress. We have to stop being forced backwards and start taking the initiative ourselves and start fighting for improvements, fighting for what we need. And the result of this resolution being out there has been interest and support from across the country. It's the kind of approach that allows us to build solidarity with other workers who are facing job loss. And other communities who are facing this situation. It allows us to build solidarity with workers in this country and indeed in other countries. And one of the great illustrations of that is from a demonstration that some of us attended in Detroit in January against GM plant closures there. So that's Rashida Slade, the representative of District of Michigan 13, and an outstanding community activist and a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, putting forward that same demand that if corporations want to walk away from our communities, we should take those plants over and use them for the public need, not for corporate greed. Any real solution has to deal with the problems we face. It has to provide the jobs for now and for the future. It has to maintain our manufacturing capacity. It has to protect workers' rights and workers' control, that any solution that comes up has to include workers having a say over what's being done and the community having a say. And it has to include a just transition to a sustainable energy economy that we have to have for the future if we're going to deal with climate change in a real, meaningful way. And that is what has to be done with productive facilities like the Oshawa complex in all of our interests. All of that is encompassed in the phrase of a Green New Deal. And we do need a Green New Deal for Oshawa and for Canada. We need a workers' Green New Deal that is the only way that we can accomplish those goals that are a solution to the problem we're facing. That will require government action. That will require government ownership or nationalization, or it won't happen. But it is an idea whose time has come. The Green New Deal is an idea whose time has come. And as Victor Hugo said, nobody and nothing can stop an idea whose time has come. And what we need to do, I believe, is to make the issue of Oshawa and the issue of a Green New Deal central to the federal election campaign that is going to happen this year. We have to make so much noise and build such a big campaign that becomes a central issue in the election campaign, and that every political party and candidate will have to address what they're going to be doing. And that is how we can win this fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. That was amazing. And so our next speaker, we're just going to get right into it, is Dimitri Lascaris. Dimitri, let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. GM's decision to shutter this plant in Oshawa is one more proof in a long list of proofs that in Canada today, markets are not free, contrary to what we're told. In Canada today, we have socialism for corporations, and we have capitalism for workers. The wealthiest actors in our society have unfettered access to the state's largesse, while the most vulnerable must largely fend for themselves. And this plant closure is as powerful a proof of that as one can imagine. Not only does Canada's government shower its generosity on those who least need it, but our government sometimes actively intervene to impede collective action by workers by, for example, adopting back-to-work legislation and launching a frontal assault on collective bargaining, as successive conservative and liberal governments have done around this country. GM announced last November that it would end production at the Oshawa plant by the end of this year. Within weeks of making its announcement, GM declared with much fanfare that it had posted an $8.1 billion net profit globally in 2018. Now, you've heard from Tony about the North American profits. They were billions of dollars higher. So not only is this an extraordinarily profitable company globally, but this continent is by far the most profitable geographic segment for this global corporation. GM's Chief Executive Officer, Mary Barra, has made clear that she is extremely focused now on doing business only where GM can earn big returns. Well, apparently, an $8.1 billion annual profit is not sufficient a return for this particular CEO. And in fact, she predicted when they disclosed the 2018 earnings that 2019 would be even larger. But again, that's not a big enough return for this CEO. As we all know, GM is earning these huge profits several years after Ottawa's $13.7 billion auto sector bailouts. Over time, those bailouts have cost Canadian taxpayers an estimated $3.7 billion. Not only has our government showered generosity on wealthy corporations like GM, but it has done so with little transparency. Last year, for example, the Trudeau government wrote off a taxpayer loan to the auto industry, but refused to say, remarkably, we paid for that loan. Refused to say how much the loan was for, or provide any other details, including who the borrower was. In 2014, the Auditor General said of the auto sector bailouts that, quote, "We found it impossible to gain a complete picture of the assistance provided, the difference the assistance made to the viability of the companies, and the amounts recovered and lost. There was no comprehensive reporting of the information to Parliament." Former CIBC World Markets chief economist Jeff Rubin recently commented that, quote, "It's clear that without the support of taxpayers, GM would not exist today." He added that the goal of the bailout was to keep alive a company that was key to the manufacturing sectors in both Canada and the United States. Quote, "The notion was that this was helping GM through extraordinary circumstances for a long run return." Long run, he said, meant more than 10 years. Mr. Rubin added that GM's Oshawa closure makes a mockery, those were his words. Again, this is a former chief economist of CIBC World Markets, no socialist, I can assure you. "It makes a mockery of Canada's efforts to defend the auto sector in the negotiations for a North American trade deal. These are precisely the middle class jobs that the Trudeau administration said free trade was going to protect." The Ottawa plant closure is not only a slap in the face to the hardworking people of this community, it's a slap in the face to all Canadian taxpayers. We supported these bailouts on the supposition that these jobs would be preserved, and we've been betrayed. We all have a reason to be upset. What is our government going to do about this travesty? Each year, Canadian governments subsidize fossil fuels to the tune of over $3 billion. That's each year. In addition, the Trudeau government, as Tony mentioned, just spent $4.5 billion in order to acquire the Trans Mountain tar sands pipeline from another wealthy American corporation, Kinder Morgan. Canada will have to spend billions more to complete the planned expansion of Trans Mountain, assuming that the Trudeau government is willing and able to suppress massive resistance to this planet-wrecking pipeline, because I can assure you that that's exactly what it's going to confront. The fact that these billions are being spent in the face of an existential climate crisis means two things. First, it means that despite the constant neoliberal refrain that governments need to tighten their belts, Canada's government, in fact, has ample fiscal capacity to make large investments to promote the public interest. The second thing these fossil fuel subsidies and buyouts of pipelines demonstrate is the Trudeau government's rhetoric about fighting the climate crisis is largely hot air. The closure of GM's Oshawa plant presents Canada's government with an opportunity, however, to change course. For once, our government can invest in workers and do so in a way that truly ensures their long-term well-being while taking strong action to combat what constitutes an existential crisis for all humanity. We urgently need to transition to an emissions-free renewable energy economy. The scale of this task surpasses any challenge that this country has ever faced, and probably surpasses any challenge that humanity as a whole has ever faced. Success will require vast investment in building renewable energy infrastructure, retrofitting buildings, expanding public transit, and electrifying our transport system. The climate crisis can and must be a gigantic generator of good-paying and sustainable jobs. If GM's Oshawa facilities were nationalized, then those valuable facilities and the thousands of skilled and hardworking Canadians whom they have employed over the years can play a vital role in that transition. If, on the other hand, GM gets away with abusing Canada's generosity, and if these facilities are permitted to become obsolete, then an extraordinary opportunity will have been squandered, and Oshawa's workers will pay dearly for it. This is the Prime Minister's chance to be true to his rhetoric. Let us hope he has the humanity to seize it.
Thank you, Dimitri. Our next speaker is the National President of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, Mike Palecek.
Thank
you, sisters and brothers, comrades. It's great to see so many of you out here tonight, because this is obviously a very important issue for this community and really for the country as a whole. And as an aside, I'd like to say that it's great to see the labor movement talking about nationalization and workers' control of industry again. The corporations have dominated this planet. They've destroyed our communities. And neoliberal capitalism has led us to an absolute crisis on a global scale. Nationalization and workers' control is the only way to break their power, and that's the direction we need to be moving. I want to start by reading you a newspaper article, or at least the beginning of it. Coal consumption affecting climate. The furnaces of the world are now burning about 2 billion tons of coal a year. When this is burned, uniting with oxygen, it adds about 7 billion tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere yearly. This tends to make air a more effective blanket for the earth and to raise its temperature. So, a lot of people think that climate change is something we've only just discovered. This newspaper article was published in 1912. 1912, over a century ago. This science has been known for a long time. And when it became a real issue, when the world scientists started coming together on it saying, hey, we've got a serious problem that we have to deal with, how did the corporations respond? Well, first of all, turns out they had been studying this. Big Oil had been studying this for decades already. They knew the problem was coming, and they buried it. And then they funded lobbyists, and they funded fake scientific organizations to come up with junk science saying, oh, we don't really know if this is happening, to throw a cloud of suspicion over the whole thing. It's not simply government inaction that has led to this crisis. It is the action of the global corporations, like GM, like the oil industry, and all of these corporations that have been doing everything they can to disrupt the movement against climate change, to disrupt the science of climate change, because they're worried about disrupting their bottom line. A corporation, any corporation, that's prepared to put the health of the entire planet at risk for its own profit doesn't deserve to exist. Now we at Canada Post, postal workers, we launched a campaign a few years ago called the Delivering Community Power Campaign, where we tried to look at Canada Post and figure out what would it take, what's our role in the green transition, what's our role in solving climate change. And Canada Post is a good place to start, because it's a massive piece of federal infrastructure. It's publicly owned. It's the largest vehicle fleet in the country, the largest logistics network in the country. So surely this is a good place to start. Yet somehow we can't seem to get any real action from the government on this. They're willing to throw millions of dollars at corporations and say it's for some kind of green transition. No problem to give millions of dollars to Loblaws to buy new refrigerators. But they can't fund the transition for their own infrastructure owned by the government. That's unacceptable. This challenge is going to require government action, and government action on a scale that we haven't seen probably since World War II. We need a complete refocusing of our economy to meet this challenge. And, the politicians will tell you that, oh, this has to happen gradually. It has to be a slow transition. We'll plan it out over years. We'll talk about it and do nothing for a couple more decades. Maybe one day in the future we'll move in that direction. Well, I'm sorry, but if you look back in the history of this country, There have been times where we've been able to completely refocus industry. And World War II is probably the best example. And it's going to take that level of social mobilization to tackle climate change. But if you look back to World War II, at the beginning of it, Canada was a negligible arms producer. Now we're just a negligent arms producer, but that's another story. But the entire economy was refocused for the war effort. We created dozens of crown corporations. Wholesale nationalizations happened all over the place. And inside of 4 years, this country built 5,000 tanks, over 10,000 ships, 16,000 planes for the war effort, over 800,000 transport trucks, a lot of which were built right here in Oshawa, in this plant, by the way. Took 1 million men, fed them, armed them, trained them, clothed them, mobilized them overseas, drafted women into the factories in order to facilitate all of this. In fact, we even created a national child care program to make that happen. So what we're saying today is if you can do this to fight a war, then surely to God you can do this to save this planet. And so we were very excited to see when the Oshawa local had passed this resolution demanding the nationalization of the Oshawa plant under workers' control. Because we thought there was a synergy here. If you look at our Delivering Community Power campaign, it's on the tables for those of you who haven't read it. We have a whole bunch of planks in here about what Canada Post needs to do to meet our obligations and what kind of green services we can provide to help this country with that transition. But one of the most important things is Canada Post has the largest vehicle fleet in the country, the largest. Those need to be transitioned to electric vehicles. That has to be done as a first step. Now we can also put charging stations in post offices right across this country. There are almost twice as many post offices as Tim Hortons in this country. We could electrify Canada's highways so that everyone can buy electric vehicles. But that's not going to happen without government intervention and government action, with a real plan to tackle climate change, not just smooth talking points and inaction, which is what we've been getting so far. So we thought immediately, back in World War II, the government stepped in and retooled plants all over the place to build planes, ships, tanks, guns, everything that was needed. Well, we need to retool some auto plants to produce electric vehicles in this country, because if the private sector is not willing to produce electric vehicles in this country, well, then the public sector needs to do it, and Oshawa is the place to start. And I'll be honest, Canada Post's vehicle fleet's 13,000 and 15,000 vehicles. That alone isn't going to keep this plant open. But it could be the first order and the first step. And there's a whole lot that needs to be done. We need to build tens of thousands of electric buses across this country. We need to build public transport, and we need to lead this transition so that ordinary people can get out of their gas guzzlers and get into clean vehicles. Nationalizing this plant, putting it under public control, putting it under community control, and moving in that direction can start the ball rolling. So I hope this meeting today can be the beginning of that fight, the beginning of that campaign, because it is urgently needed. We have to not only save Oshawa GM plant, but we need to lead this transition. We need to break the power of the corporations over our society that have been stalling action on climate change for decades, and we need to put our economy into the hands of the people. Because as long as the big corporations are in control, they're always going to do what's profitable. They're always going to be there with a handout. They're always going to be demanding bailouts and then pulling out a few years later. We can't have that anymore. It's time for public ownership, public control, and a real plan to tackle climate change. Thank you.
Russ Christianson from the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation.
Well, someone's got a fire in their belly, and I think we all do, because we all care about this planet. We care about our children. The other day I was talking to my son, who's 22 years old, just graduated from university, and he had a conversation a number of times over the course of the last year with his friends about the decision not to have children, because they're concerned about the world that their children would come into. We have to do something about that. Something that wasn't in my biography was that I was a steel worker when I was a young man. I was the age of my son. I worked at Stelco in a steel mill, hard work, obviously, and I've been on picket lines, and I understand the struggle that workers have gone through over the last century. I did a master's of industrial relations, so I studied all that. And I've lived it. And I made a decision when I was in my 20s to work in the cooperative movement to try and help communities help themselves. And that's really what this meeting is about. Because nothing is going to happen if you expect someone else to do it for you. Right. You have to do it for yourselves. And that's what cooperatives are about. And the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation is an organization that started in 1992. I was at the founding meeting. The Canadian Labour Congress was at the founding meeting. They supported then, they still support it now. It's a small organization. It has about 50 worker-owned businesses across Canada that are members. Quebec has a larger number. But I want to say that there are worker cooperatives around the world that are large manufacturing businesses that are owned by the workers. One example, and I had the pleasure of touring this facilities in 1987, and now it's grown three times as big. 81,000 workers, mostly manufacturing jobs. It's in the Basque region of Spain, which was firebombed in the Second World War. And out of that rubble and those ashes, they built a worker industrial state that takes care of each other. Now those profits that we were talking about earlier for GM, does anyone here know how much Mary Barra, the current CEO of GM, makes per year?
27 million?
How much?
Was it 27 million just the salary?
Yeah, it's pretty damn close. $29 million in 28.
Salary, not
Yeah.
stock options.
Stock options are $14.5 million, salaries 2.5, and then there's options, other bonuses, etc. $29 million for doing what exactly? Honestly, and for shutting plants all over the world, for shutting plants like your brothers and sisters in South Korea. Their plant was shut 2 years ago, and now it's been bought by a consortium of companies to build electric vehicles that apparently GM didn't see fit to build there. Well, it's the same thing here in Oshawa. Like, you saw that photo, that aerial photo that Tony showed of that huge plant, 10 million square feet, with that tiny little paint area left. What about all the rest of that plant and all that equipment and all the skilled people here in this community that want to do a good day's work and create something, not just for our society now, but for our children and our grandchildren, a legacy. And we don't want this wonderful community of Oshawa to go down the tubes. So people have to organize, you have to get together. The Canadian Worker Co-op Federation will support you in any way we can. The point of worker co-ops is that they're democratic workplaces. The employees own the workplaces. They control the workplaces. So Mondragon, the co-op system in Spain that I was talking about earlier that has 81,000 employees. Does anyone have a wild guess about what the wage differential is between the highest paid person, which is a manager, and the lowest paid person, which is a startup position in those factories? Does anyone have a wild guess?
6 to 1.
6 to 1 is correct. You know that. 6 to 1. So Mary Barra, the lowest paid person at General Motors and is starting, not an intern, but a real job, about $20, $25 an hour. Mary Barra gets paid 457 times more than the lowest paid person at GM. I mean, that's just outrageous. It's outrageous. And she's making decisions not in the best interest, clearly, of the workers or the communities that those workers live in. That's what I'm talking about. That's what cooperatives do. I grew up in the prairies in Alberta. That's where the cooperative movement really took hold in Canada. In the Maritimes, in the prairies, Quebec, right across this country. Half of Canadians are active members of cooperatives. We have something that, building together with the union movement and the cooperative movement, no one can stop us. That's what we have to do, and we can find ways to make that happen.
Thank you very much, Russ. So our final speaker for the evening, until we get into some small group discussions, is our MPP for Oshawa, Jennifer French, who I think will elect to sit there because, you know, Jennifer used to be a teacher, so I'm seeing what she has set up here. She has a lot of note cards and things sitting, so I won't have her come up to there. We have a mic right there for Jennifer. So let's give Jennifer French a round of applause.
And I understand the live stream is having a hard time hearing us. How's my volume? Okay, good. Thank you, and thank you for ratting me out that I have all of my note cards here. However, I'm not just too lazy to get up to the podium. First of all, I want to congratulate the organizers and Labour Council for putting this together. It is a full house. For those of you at home who can't see, it is a full house. And I think along as well, I recognize that Councillor John Neal has joined us, and I know that people across the community are wanting to hear what is said here tonight, and I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to weigh in on a few points and to learn from the panel, but I'm also looking forward to hearing from the small groups, because I look around this room and I know that there are some movers and shakers and a lot of people who we could all stand to learn from. So I have the opportunity, of course, to serve as the Member of Provincial Parliament here in Oshawa, and I'm very glad to do that. I'm glad to be in rooms like this where I hear from the labor movement and activists, but I'm also very privileged to hear from the broader community. And I'll start out by saying that this morning, I started my day in a grade 5 classroom, and I asked them what they care about and wanted to kind of get a sense of what matters to them. And I had about 40 kids. There were 2 classes there, and it was issues like homelessness. It was issues, actually some of the things that I heard were about construction takes too long, and I heard about sidewalk safety, and I heard about bullying, but I heard over and over about GM. The kids wanted to know, did I know what was happening with GM? They wanted to talk about mental health in relation to what's happening with GM. These are grade 5, so give or take 10-year-olds, and they are living in our community. They are just as uncertain as the rest of us, only maybe with even less access to that understanding. But everyone in this community is connected to GM, but they're connected to this community, and there's a lot, you know, as I said, and as Tony mentioned, you know, GM didn't build Oshawa, Oshawa built GM, but that is in a very real way. That's not just in the cars that we drive in. That is our charities, that is our broader community. And everybody knows that. And so when we're talking about the environment, we're talking about climate, the average community, I say average, your neighbors that maybe aren't part of the labor movement are starting to engage, are starting to really be concerned about the future. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about what I'm seeing, unfortunately, at the Ontario Legislature and try my best to connect it to this conversation. I want to say Tiffany's recommendation of the video, A Message from the Future, you have to watch it. You have to. That's your homework. But part of what it makes that video so, I think, different is not only that it is about the vision. It is told from a standpoint of we're already there, and she is looking back at where we started and highlighting the future as though it's already happened. And it highlights the just transition is possible, and it talks about our being stewards of our broader community and the environment. And it really is worth a watch because the theme of it is leaving no one behind. The theme is, we can be whatever we have the courage to see, as she said. So when we're having conversations about bold change, when we're talking about, I appreciate what Tony said, that Oshawa must be a central issue in the federal election. We're going to need a representative there who talks about Oshawa in all of the ways that they can, in terms of General Motors, but in terms of Oshawa's potential and its future. So I'm looking forward to having all of those conversations as we build towards that federal election and that federal change, which I think we all feel is coming. But the conversations around responsibility, environmental responsibility, about workers' safety, about workers' voice. I'm sitting in the Ontario Legislature across from a government that is not inactive. They are active, and they are actively taking us in the wrong direction, and they are actively targeting and attacking anyone who would stand up to fight against them, but they are targeting the potential of this province. So, for example, I woke up this morning and, to the announcement of the fact that Ford has eliminated the 50 million tree program. How many of you heard that? Okay, so that's about planting 50 million trees by 2025, and that has been axed. Sorry, pun not intended, but that has been ended. I didn't actually mean to do that, but it has been ended, and it's a terrible comment. When you think about the importance of trees' their capacity for improving air quality and water quality, and protecting shorelines and mitigating flood risk. He's also, halved, I think it's cut it in half, the flood management programs. Like, we all know when we look around that things are changing, and some of our community members would argue about why it's changing and who's responsible for the change, but we all darn well know that things are changing, and we are stewards of this land, and we have to have a government and demand it of the government that we not only make things better, but we don't actively try to make things worse. This is a government that has made 2 attempts to open the Greenbelt for development. They have cut money from the Ministry of the Environment. We know when we look at Windsor and we see the direct impact of ending the rebates. I mean, these have real implications, not just the environmental side, but our workers and community side. When GM made its announcement, part of what they talked about for their future was what we've heard here today: green and electric vehicles, whether they be fleet vehicles or hoverboards, whatever the next is going to be. And what did our premier do in the wake of that? Metrolinx pulled out, removed all the electric vehicle chargers from the GO station parking lots. What? How do you support a future when you have a major employer, you have a corporation like GM who says this is what we're planning to do, and others are saying it, we're saying it here tonight, and the premier said, nope, pull the charging stations, right? It's limiting the potential, and it's not just a potential that is a whimsical, visionary fancy. This is where it's going. And so part of my role is to hear from folks in this community, but is to fight like heck at the Ontario legislature to push against a very determined premier and a very determined government that is pulling us back. When we are talking about, so when you all watch that video, a message from the future, there's a lot that focuses on the low carbon sectors, right? The sectors like healthcare and education, our social services, our arts, that not big polluters, right? And they're doing the important work of supporting our communities so that all of us have the best life. He's targeting those sectors specifically. I'm looking out here and I see one of our paramedics, like picking off group by group. I was just looking at you and saying we were up here talking about where we should be putting charging stations to support the future that is inevitable and is coming. And we were saying put it at libraries, but the government made a decision the other day about libraries. So anyway, I think I'm in the right room and I'm from the right community and with the right folks, or the left folks, excuse me, to push and to demand in a way that they will listen. And I know that this is not a premier who is listening to us and to the folks here, but he's going to have to. I have the opportunity to be the critic for the NDP of infrastructure, transportation, highways, and thank you for reminding us about the potential with our fleet vehicles and to talk about electric vehicles. There's money that could be left on the table that the feds are willing to give for green infrastructure, but we have to meet that federal criteria, and this is not a province right now that is doing anything green or clean or forward thinking. So it's even things like that we have to make sure that all of those pieces can fit, that green money, that infrastructure funding, that's part of my responsibility is to push for that. So I want to, again, how am I for time? Okay. You give me a microphone and I'm a teacher and I'm a talker, so thank you. But I want to be, I appreciate being here and to hearing from the workers because it is workers' voice that should be determining where we go. You pick any group and it's the front lines that know the work, that know what is needed to do a job better or more safely, or with a positive future in mind. And so again, thank you for inviting me, but thank you for always making sure that I'm in the loop and understanding where to push, because that is something I'm learning as I go. And I come from a community that will always make sure that we fight like heck for what it is that our community deserves, what our workers have worked a long time to build in this area, to make sure that we have that positive potential in that future. And so again, thank you very much. I congratulate everyone here on an excellent event, and I look forward to these conversations. Send me an email anytime with your voices, because I would like to share them directly with Ford, because if the message is leave no one behind and build a future that is sustainable and is optimistic, he needs to get that message. So thank you very much.
So this microphone's way better. Before we get into, so I'm just going to use it. Before we get into a quick Q&A and into small groups, I just want to encourage you to check out the Friends of Public Services Facebook page. That's where we're live streaming it. Also on Twitter, this event is the hashtag is Nationalize GM and hashtag Green New Deal. But I also just want to let folks know, you may know that Unifor 222 issued a letter of solidarity to Mexican workers who have been engaged in mass strikes demanding higher wages. The letter sent by, the letter sent by local 222 President Colin James expressed solidarity with the struggle of Mexican workers, stating that we know you're battling many of the same corporations that we are here, and we wish you success. The goal of corporations is to try to keep workers isolated and weak. Our response must be to become more united so we are stronger. So the union at the Metropolitan Autonomous University in Mexico, which covers not only professors but all those who work in any capacity at the university, have been on strike for 84 days, and is part of a general strike wave sweeping Mexico that includes auto parts workers and Walmart workers, amongst others. Edward Velasco is a former head of the union and is joining us tonight. So, yeah, thank you for joining us. The Mexican working class in itself is in struggle, often more militantly than we are, and we know that global solidarity beats global greed. Edward, would you like to say a few words? Putting you on the spot.
I'm shy.
Oh, you're shy? The former union head is shy. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we welcome you to join the conversation at any time. So, with that being said, I will open up the floor for a chance for some Q&A with our panelists, and I will get some roving mics going, and I'll bring it over to you.
Hi, my name is Jenny, and I'm a delegate to the Toronto New York Region Labour Council, as well as a member with a group called Fight Back, and a social worker by trade. And I am absolutely excited to be here tonight. I think these are the very ideas that need to revitalize our labor movement. And as a fellow trade unionist, I think it's absolutely essential that we don't leave this resolution with Unifor Local 222. We bring this to the entire labor movement. I'm going to bring it to my union, Workers United. We have activists with CUPE, activists with ATU, and I encourage all trade unionists to be pushing this far and wide. I also want to bring it to our Toronto New York Region Labour Council. Hell, I was just chatting with Mike how we need to get it to the OFL, because this is not just a GM issue, this is not just an Oshawa issue, this is an issue that impacts the entire working class. This is about fighting against the race to the bottom. And so I have two questions. My first question would be, what advice would you give fellow trade unionists in spreading this far and wide? I've given you some of my own ideas. And my second question is, we've talked a lot about building a greener and more sustainable economy. And I believe that nationalization with democratic workers' control, and that's key. Because if you look at a lot of public entities and a lot of crown corporations, there is no democracy in those plants or in the, I mean, look at Canada Post. Mike's giving me the look, right? Like, absolutely. Talk about lack of democracy there. And that's critical in terms of workers have the knowledge, the talent, the expertise to take that control. And it's, I think for me, it's not about, it's about seeing it as a bridge to transform society. It can't just be one factory that becomes nationalized. It's an excellent start that can inspire many others. I'm thinking of Chrysler, but I'm also thinking of other industries. Even as social workers, we talk about not having a say or control of our workplace when we see practices implemented that we don't agree with, that we know actually harm our clients. And so I think that this is actually something that raises the question, who controls the economy? Is it the capitalists? Is it the bosses? Or should it be the workers? That is at the heart of this discussion. And I'm going to say, comrades, if Team Vogue can talk about socialism, so can the labor movement. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how this links to socialism. And last but not least, big solidarity, and really proud to be here.
So maybe we'll take another question and then we'll move it over to the panelists. So I'm just going right. Yep. Okay. Yep. Here, we'll go right here.
Hi, my name is Johnny. I'm part of the Mount Dennis Community Association in Toronto. I came here because the MDCA is very green, and we have something called an eco-neighborhood vision. In Mount Dennis, we have Canada Post is based there, as well as the TTC right next door. The community has fought against a gas plant, a fossil fuel plant, to produce power as a backup generator for the Eglinton LRT, and we won that fight. And we convinced them not to build a plant and instead focus on a new futuristic technology to provide that backup. And currently there's a building that's up for lease. Unfortunately, the owner is Metrolinx, a very opaque organization, but the building is up for lease. And we think that it could be a great place for maybe an alliance between labor and other environmental groups to use it as a base to elaborate on the technology in Mount Dennis. So my question is for Mike, whether there has been any discussions on partnering with the TTC in that area, in that industrial area back there, on creating new technology to move forward.
One more question.
From the live stream?
Okay, there's someone with the mic there.
I got the mic.
You got a question?
Yeah. So, My name is Barry Weisler with the Socialist Action, and I'm chair of the NDP Socialist Caucus. Clearly, the question is, what do we do next? This is a fantastic meeting. So this is the kind of meeting we need to have many times full. And as Tony said, the problem is GM, the solution is public ownership. The extension of that general point is, workers make the country run. Workers should run the country. It's a theme that we need to take into all working class organizations. At this time of imminent climate catastrophe, the best way to exemplify the road forward is to demand nationalize GM and to build the green vehicles of the future. How and where can we advance this clear, simple demand? We need to take it into all of our union organizations, and we need to take it into the labor-based New Democratic Party. The NDP Socialist Caucus has taken this issue, a resolution which many of you have at your tables, which calls for the nationalization of General Motors and the kind of production that is needed in order to advance an environmental perspective. We've taken this resolution into dozens of NDP district associations over the last 2 months, and it has been adopted in dozens of organizations. This issue will be debated at the NDP convention in Hamilton in mid-June. Everyone in this room should become and can become a delegate to that convention. Together we can ensure that the resolution gets to the floor, that there's no shuffling of it aside because it's allegedly a federal issue. This is an issue that affects everybody in every province, and particularly in this community. We can win this fight. And this fight, I would submit, and I wonder if you agree, is intimately linked with the fight against Doug Ford and his conservative government. We need to energize the workers' movement to get off its knees, to stand up to the austerity agenda, and to dump Doug Ford with a general strike. An injury to Oshawa workers is an injury to all workers. Nationalize GM, and do you agree we can take this perspective forward into all of the organizations of the working class, the unions, and the NDP?
Thanks. So a myriad of questions and comments in there from folks. So there's a few mics there if anyone would like to go first. Maybe Mike, there was one specifically for you. Sorry, I'm putting people on the spot.
Sure. Just question on has there been any, have we been working with the TTC on developing new technologies? No, we haven't, as far as I'm aware, although sometimes our locals are more proactive than we are. So, although we are absolutely looking for allies and people to work with on these things. So I've written that down and I'm going to take that back and we'll look into it. In terms of some of the other questions, so what advice do we have to spread this far and wide? I think, first of all, show of hands, how many union members are here today? Lots. Okay. So we need you to take these resolutions back to your unions and pass them through your local meetings. Get the entire labor movement on board for this campaign. That's the way we can build support. To get it onto the agenda for the OFL convention later this year. I agree with what Barry said as well. We have to take this into every working class organization, every labor organization, and put this on the agenda. Because the question of nationalizing this plant really does touch on a much broader question of systemic change. And I think, Jenny, you're right. This does have to lead to a discussion around how we want to structure our society. And I alluded to it in my remarks. We need to break the control of the corporations over our society. We need to stop commodifying every aspect of our lives and put the economy in the hands of the people. You can call that socialism, you can call it whatever you want, but that's what needs to happen. And this, I think, is a great start in that direction. It's a campaign that's real, that's tangible, and can be an example for the entire country.
I see Russ has the mic.
I just want to
reiterate what you said in terms of building allies. That's why I'm here on behalf of the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, because we are an ally. And I'm a prairie person, that's where I grew up. I live in Ontario now. But I'm very pragmatic. I think we have to be very realistic. Yes, nationalize and push for that, and workplace democracy, and employee ownership. And we have to be realistic about what we can start with. So the postal fleet, that may be a great option to start with. And we need to look at how we can keep the plant capacity, move forward with some feasibility around what products that we can actually build here, like be real about it, and something that's attainable. And then we can go to the government and we can say, look, this is what we need. And they've lost $3.7 billion just with GM and Chrysler. That's how much taxpayers have not been paid back from the bailout. In the United States, it's $12 billion US. So we're also working with labor and Canadian and US worker co-ops right across the border. Because there's 4 GM plants in the United States that are about to close too. So we need solidarity across borders, including Mexico and across North America. So let's build allies and let's be realistic and go through some practical steps to make things happen.
I have some questions from the live stream that I can also add before our panelists go to answer the ones that have been asked. We have a question from the live stream from Mike Niedermer. The government just spent billions on a pipeline. What do you think the cost would be to nationalize GM? So if anyone would like to hazard a guess on that. And then we have a question on the live stream from CUPW Saskatoon President Julie Sanderson, stating that the official opposition leader Ryan Millet announced a plan called Renew Saskatchewan in October 2018. If elected, he would introduce a plan which calls for Saskatchewan residents to use existing public sector services to install retrofits for homes. This plan is similar to the plan the CCF introduced 50 plus years ago, which electrified Saskatchewan residents and had the retrofit changes applied to their bills until they're paid in full. What sort of current government plans are currently in place to transition to a green society? How has the provincial and federal governments responded to the closure of the GM plant? How have they responded to this idea? So people are watching all over Canada, so just interested to hear more about what's going on here. So I don't know, Tony, if you have any remarks. I'm just putting people on the spot, or Dimitri, or Jennifer. Yeah, Jennifer's got your hand up. She just needs the mic.
Okay, I'll say, is this working? Hello? A couple of quick points. I think that this issue and issues like this are an opportunity for the labor movement to stop being on the defensive and go on the offensive. And that absolutely I also believe that we should be demanding support from any political party that wants our support in the coming election, whether that be the NDP, whether it be the Green Party, Quebec Solidaire, or the Bloc Québécois. Any party should be put to the test of, are they going to meet the crisis that we're facing right now and do something positive? If you look at the word socialist or socialism, and if we look at parties around the world where they are willing to face that and advocate that, the Democratic Socialists of America is probably one of the fastest growing political parties in the United States right now. Is elected members to Congress, is elected members to municipalities, because they're not afraid of the word and what it stands for, which is working people having control in their own interests. And if you look at the Labour Party in the UK, having a leader with some courage and some political principles of socialism and advocating nationalization of key features of the UK economy has made the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn the largest political party in Europe, and Jeremy Corbyn just waiting to be the next Prime Minister of the UK. So no political party in this country should shy away from taking a principled position, supporting the working class, and supporting the changes we need.
Okay, so lots of different thoughts there. And Johnny, I'm going to start with Johnny behind Johnny. I'm going to start with your comment about new futuristic technology. And I think that what I was saying before about this government limiting the potential, the technology that we can't even dream or imagine yet, there has to be space for that to ensure that we have a clean and green and safe future. And I think that is a big part of what we have to push for. And Jenny, you made lots of great points, but in terms of who controls the economy, great question. And when we look at the large corporations and the large employers around the country, that part of their plan is to declare bankruptcy and pay it back to the parent company and just head on out of here. We as a country have to have the conversation around who are we inviting in and who are we committing to, and what do we want that employment to look like. Barry, I will look forward to seeing you in Hamilton. I will tell you that right now, Oshawa has always been the heart of all of the things, frankly. But right now, especially in the wake of GM's announcement and the uncertainty, it is a huge conversation in the NDP, but in all of our circles. So I know that there will be a number of resolutions that hit the floor that want to figure out how do we move forward in a way that supports workers and in a way that ensures that we are being green and responsible and forward-thinking. So I will see you in Hamilton.
Do you support this resolution?
You're putting me on the spot. Yeah, you are, and I knew that would come. I started by saying that I am here to listen and learn. I am not going to pretend to be an expert. This has got my wheels turning, and then while that's a bit of a...
Another fun. The wheels turning.
Oh, no, okay, but that...
You can ask that one.
I'm going to be speaking to the different resolutions that come to the floor. So I am looking forward to having a better answer for you, frankly. And when we're talking about nationalization across the country and what we have seen, and what I know, Barry, that's not good enough, but you can keep pushing. When we talk about nationalization across the country, or public ownership and public control, publicly administered, that's the conversation that I do know and am continuing to have, and I think that that's where all of this is going, is the public voice. This is a government that has just taken public health care and says, don't worry, you can still use your OHIP card because it's publicly funded. Well, that's public dollars, but it isn't publicly administered. They're going to be privatizing and doing damage there. And that's the theme everywhere. And the entire community wants to protect its public services and its public sectors. And I think to Julie's question from the live stream, we have to ensure that the province and the feds don't just protect our public services and public institutions, that they strengthen them or look at new ways to make them better. So.
Okay, so we were just kind of working on because we saw that there's still some questions. Yeah, I see lots of hands. So I'm going to do a couple more questions, answer, and then we're going to skip the small group work for a minute because we do have a call to action. And I just have a feeling that once we get into the group work, some of the room's going to, and the live stream kind of won't be watching anymore at that point. So we'll do the call to action first, but we'll do a few more questions and then go to the panelists again. So we have a question here. Yep, Sawyer.
Hi. So my name's Sawyer. I'm from Socialist Fight Back Oshawa. Right now, in Oshawa, and as well as in Ontario, we're in this period of mass mobilization that we're seeing in these rallies at Queen's Park and things like that, especially with Doug Ford's attack on the working class and the students. But a lot of this is all taking place in Toronto or in other places in Ontario. But the problem is that Oshawa has a very radical working class history. The strike of 37 was one of the most significant strikes in Canadian labor history, and that happened here in Oshawa from GM workers. And that was echoing a strike, a mass plant occupation that had happened in Flint the year before, again in the GM plants. So we know that there's this history of radicalization and radical mass movements from auto workers as well as the Oshawa community. So what we're trying to do is we need to build towards more of these mass movements coming to Oshawa so we can actually fight for our city in our city and to fight for our community in our community. So what can we do to start seeing that happen? I know myself, we have a rally planned for April 27th at 2 p.m. at Memorial Park for safe injection sites in Oshawa, but what can we do to make these more? What can we do to have more of these rallies going on here?
Sid Ryan, citizen. Let me say a few things. I think we're talking about two issues that are interconnected. One, of course, is climate change, and the other one is the nationalization of General Motors. And obviously they're connected. But one of the things I want to leave a message about is the lack of leadership in the labour movement today with respect to climate change, with the exception of the postal workers. There's not a union that's taken this issue seriously. We have the ability to move things. As we keep talking about what can we do to make change, well, there's two issues I'll tell you about that the labour movement absolutely have control over, and they've got to get off their asses and start pushing for it. And one of those is cutting the subsidies to the oil and gas industries. There are at least $2.5 to $3 billion on an annual basis going in subsidies to the richest corporations in the world. And at the same time, we have workers who are desperately needing training and retraining programs to be put in place to transition them away from the extractive industries. And there's no push from the labour movement to put the pressure on the federal government to say that this is absolutely wrong for us to be putting this kind of money into the richest corporations in the world. And I believe we could do a public relations campaign around that it would embarrass the federal government into cutting those subsidies. And the second thing is, how about divesting our pension plans from the extractive industries as well? We control these pension plans in the public and in the private sector. And all we need to do is to agitate around the boards where we do have workers in joint control of most of our pension plans in the public and in the private sector. And if we start to cut the funding to the extractive industries, we'll begin to see them hurting. As a matter of fact, this is not a radical idea. New York State and New York City on the same day announced about 6 months ago that they will no longer be investing their employees' public sector pension plans into the extractive industries. So if they can do it in New York, and Lord knows that Cuomo is no left-wing socialist, if he can see that the extractive industries are a dying industry, then for God's sakes, why can't the labour movement in Canada take this issue on and divest our monies out of those industries? And then, of course, the last thing I want to talk about is the nationalisation of General Motors. Look, this is not a radical idea. If you take a look at large swaths of the economy, take a look at, for example, Canada Post, Ontario Hydro Power Generation, public transportation, they're all nationalised, besides the healthcare and the education system. So really, this huge swaths of our economy is already nationalised. So I don't see why it's a radical point of view to say, if we're now going to start moving into the new generation of clean energy, moving into electric cars, and by the way, I'll finish at this point, Germany, most of Europe, and in China have a plan already to ban the internal combustion engine by the year 2035, which means they already know we are moving away. China is going to have 60% of all of its cities will be investing in electric cars by 2035. Europe is actually saying that all of their cars will be, basically by 2035, will be electric cars. Not just the public sector transportation, I'm talking about privately owned vehicles as well. So we can see we're rapidly moving into a whole new era. And I cannot see why, if you can do it in Germany, where it's basically solar energy and wind power is essentially receiving massive government subsidies to generate and to build those industries, and they're basically nationalised. I cannot understand why here in this country we cannot take a look at this plant in General Motors and say, you know what, that's the new technology, so why shouldn't government be involved? Why shouldn't workers be involved in investing heavily in that industry so that we can have a cutting edge and be developing a Canadian automobile that's an electric automobile and start selling it across the world, not only just here in Canada, but everywhere else. So nationalisation of the auto industry in Ontario is not such a radical idea, because it was already said here a few moments ago, Jeremy Corbyn is absolutely storming through the polls over in the UK because of two things. He said he would bring back the nationalisation of the electricity system and the public transportation system, and they love him for it. If we had politicians in this country with the guts to stand up and really say what they mean in terms of the nationalisation and the public ownership of key industries, we'd be further ahead, and that guarantee that that political party would do extremely well in the polls.
My name is Christina. I'm also with Fight Back. I have a quick question directed at Tony. The plan that you described at the end of your presentation was to make the nationalization of GM an election issue, which absolutely it should be 100% agree with that. However, if the plant is closing at the end of the year and the election isn't until the fall, then what do you do until then? And also, it seems to me that making it an election issue will only have an effect if a government that cares about the workers wins the election, and there's no guarantee that it will happen. So if that doesn't happen, what do you do? I think that the power is in the hands of the workers, right? And that's who we need to put our faith in, not in the politicians. Thank you.
So over to the panelists. Thank you.
I want to express my wholehearted support for what you said, Sid. I just want to add a couple of comments. The argument against fossil fuel subsidies is an absolute no-brainer. It is one that we can win very easily. You named some of the reasons. First of all, it has been mentioned that Trudeau promised to end fossil fuel subsidies, and he broke that promise. Secondly, the recipients of these subsidies are, in fact, extraordinarily wealthy corporations. Thirdly, this is the equivalent of throwing gas on the fire. Actually encouraging the use of fossil fuels when we're confronted by an existential climate crisis is insanity. It's the definition of insanity. So this is an argument that the labor movement should be able to win very, very easily in the Canadian public. And also even people on the right, the thought of corporate handouts at the expense of the taxpayer is not appealing to them. So it's something that should appeal across the political spectrum. In terms of divestment, when I was a class actions lawyer, I often acted in securities class actions on behalf of union pension funds. And I became quite familiar with their portfolios. For example, the teacher's pension plan, a massive portfolio. You may be surprised to know how much of that money is invested in the fossil fuel sector and in companies that are somehow profiting from the fossil fuel sector. And if you took the time to actually inquire into the extent of union pension plan investment in fossil fuels, you might be quite disappointed and alarmed at what you see. So you can make a real difference by taking that massive amount of pension money out of the fossil fuel sector. The last thing I want to say, I just want to talk a little bit about strategy, because I'm not going to be anywhere near as able as the other people at this table to talk to you about how to build our allies in the labor movement. I may be able to offer you some insight into how you're going to have to deal with the public, and I think the challenge you're going to confront is that with a wide swath of the Canadian public, nationalization has become a dirty word. A dirty word. Amongst the people in this room, we all share love of this concept and the notion of public ownership, but people have been conditioned to think that public ownership means inefficiency, and it means black hole for the treasury. Money is lost. You need to tell people, your fellow Canadians who are not sensitive to the importance of public ownership, they're not out of the labor movement, for example. You need to give them successful examples of public ownership. Cases where they're not actually draining the treasury, where public corporations are not draining the treasury, perhaps even adding to them, and where they've actually managed to achieve a high level of efficiency. You need to talk to them about the other benefits of public ownership. It isn't all about making money, and it isn't all about efficiency. It's about community control. It's about the corporations acting in the best interest of the community. Privately owned corporations act in the best interest of the managers, not the shareholders. That's a lie. They act in the best interest of the managers. Public ownership is the only guarantee that corporations will act in the best interest of the community. You need to make sure that people understand that.
Any final? Okay, Russ, yep.
I just wanted to mention that This room is in solidarity amongst themselves and hopefully with other unions and other communities. But there was a poll that came out 2 weeks ago, 2,000 sample, which was great, right across Canada. And it talked about the Green New Deal for Canada. What we're talking about here, nationalization, not necessarily in those words, but certainly public ownership. 61% of all Canadians support it. Major government intervention in the economy to deal with these issues of climate catastrophe, huge household debt, precarious employment, all those issues that Sid talked about too that are all tied together. 61% support it, only 17% of Canadians oppose it. So we have all kinds of allies out there. We have to reach beyond just the labor movement. We need to go to all the people in our communities and talk to them, all our friends and relatives. Now, it was interesting because that 61% increased to 66% when this was added. Tax corporations and wealthy individuals more to pay for the Green New Deal. Now that's fantastic. It actually increased. So people are talking about, hey, we need a fair tax system. So that's great. Canadians are on side. When you look at the political, how people vote politically, so for the three main parties, the Green Party ironically wasn't included, but for the NDP supporters, 79% of NDP supporters support the Green New Deal. 76% of Liberal voters, and even the Conservatives. 52% of Conservatives that vote Conservative support the Green New Deal. So get the hell out there and talk to your Conservative friends too.
Someone who has to talk to Conservatives every day, yeah.
I recognize that not everyone in this room has Conservative friends to talk to or wants to make them. However, sometimes we're related to them. Or we live next door to them, and we all have access to people who believe differently or vote differently or feel differently, but we all have a lot of areas of overlap. And so, Sawyer, you had asked, how do we best fight for our community in our community? I think that is a question that every community is asking, because folks, whether it's on the education front, whether they have a local employment situation, they're trying to mobilize and they are trying to organize and get together and figure out how do we change this, because people are really upset and they're very scared of this government. I'm reminded of a conversation that I had in the broader community. So outside of anyone connected to the labor movement, I had a conversation with someone, and this was back with the fight to keep hydro public. And they said, oh, I'm so worried about hydro. We just have to make sure that it doesn't go public. And I stopped and I took a deep breath and I said, please tell me what that means. And they said, well, we can't let it go public. And I said, but it is public. And they said, no, it can't go public because then the shareholders make the decisions. We have to make the decisions. And I stopped and I thought, oh, we're talking about the stock market and when something goes up. Got it. So the language is key. That's why you have to have the conversations with your neighbors, because we use a language that others don't understand necessarily. And then I explained the difference between privatized and public, and they were totally on side. So with anything to do with public control and public ownership and public involvement, community voice, everybody seems to be on that page broadly, or more and more. So I think that having those conversations, to your point down there, you have to engage them. Just, hey, what do you think of this? Don't ask what their stripe is. Just find out where their starting point. That's what I would suggest.
Any other final comments from our panelists? Yep.
Yeah, the question was asked about what we do to fight back against war in our communities. I wanted to come in on that. I could talk all night on this, but I'm trying to be brief. Because I'm a veteran of the anti-Campbell movement in British Columbia. Where I come from, right around the turn of the century, a right-wing government was elected in BC that went on an absolute offensive against the labor movement and against social programs. They laid off tens of thousands of people. They slashed wages. It was an awful time. And I think the big lesson from the anti-Campbell movement is that the bleeding doesn't stop until you demonstrate you can shut the province down.
Yes.
That's what we learned. And it took us years to get to that point. Years of sustained mobilization to get to the point where we actually started having general strikes, where we were able to make the government back down. And we did, several times. But the key, in my mind, to that happening was the grassroots mobilization from below. The labor councils have a key role to play in this. And one thing that happened in BC throughout the anti-Campbell movement is you saw community solidarity coalitions forming. Usually with the labor council at the center of them, bringing in all of the other social movements that aren't necessarily, union members, that aren't necessarily part of the labor movement. All of the other social movements were brought into one umbrella, one tent, in a city-by-city basis. In Vancouver, it was the Lower Mainland Coalition for Social Justice. But you had different organizations set up. And that was the grassroots that really propelled that movement. And frankly, the labor movement was also quick to really push back and fight back. There were mass demonstrations, that was called, but it took those community solidarity coalitions to really sustain that mobilization and to push labor leaders into acting. Because, I remember it took us years to get to the point where we could have a general strike, but it didn't just happen on its own. There were committees set up to prepare general strikes. There was massive pressure put on every organization of the working class. I can remember a demonstration where 50,000 of us marched over the Burrard Street Bridge and had a rally in downtown Vancouver. Well, there were 20,000 flags that were printed up that said, "Prepare the general strike," and they went like hotcakes. There was a plane circling the rally with a banner that said, "Prepare the general strike." And every time a labor leader got onto the stage to give a speech, they were drowned out by the crowd chanting, "General strike, general strike." That's what it took to get action, and that's got to be built from the bottom up. I really believe those community solidarity coalitions, bringing the labor movement alongside the rest of the social movements, that's the key to making that happen. And it's got to be done in every town, one by one, with key activists such as yourself.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. I know that there's more questions, and maybe afterwards people will get a chance to ask them one-on-one, but we just, we're talking a lot about action and what can we do, and we have this room full of people, and we want to do something. And we do. We have lots of ideas, and we're going to get to you with that. I do want to mention another important, which actually Jennifer just passed me a note to mention it as well. One of the things that we have also in Oshawa, working in conjunction with Labor Council, is a group that was started under the Common Front, actually under Sid Ryan's leadership at the Ontario Federation of Labor, called We Are Oshawa. And they're actually having a meeting May 16th, I think. So if you want to get involved there, I think it's at 7 o'clock. You should go up to that. Look them up on Facebook. It's on there. And also, if you want to learn about the days of protest and mounting a fight back, I think someone in this room actually wrote a book on it. I think Sid Ryan has a book on it. It may have some copies available, but also it has a book launch in Oshawa at Riley's Pub May 9th at 7 p.m. Because as we know, unprecedented times call for unprecedented action, and we can certainly do that. We also have, if you're not going to enough meetings on, which is what I just talked about, May 14th at 5:30 at this exact hall at IBW. We're before Labor Council starts at 7. Definitely stay there for that. But if you could come 5:30, we have this rapid response network that's meeting to talk about not all working in silos, but working together on these actions and what they look like, and getting to a place where we can shut down Oshawa. Like, just shut it down. So we'll get there, yeah. And now I would like to hand it over to James to talk about some action that we're going to be doing this weekend based on this campaign. Let's give James has done so much work on this too. Let's give James a round of applause.
So
that don't know, my name is James Hudd, and I'm the campaign coordinator on Delivering Community Power, our plan to transform post offices to fight climate change, fight poverty, and to grow the labor movement, along with Ellen Bowles there in the back. Now, we've had some great ideas about how we actually move forward. Heard some great speakers presenting a vision about a refined and improved labor movement that meets all of our needs and creates a better country. So we know that ideas aren't enough to create change on their own. So we actually need to put them into action. So by a show of hands, who now wants to nationalize the General Motors plant? I love it. Almost 90% of people here. Now, who's ready to get to work? To start a coalition to do that? Yeah, make some noise. So, as postal workers, as organizers, we know the power of building a coalition. And you do that by going out and talking to people from all walks of life. And you do that by hitting the streets and knocking on doors. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing this weekend. We're going to be building a big coalition of groups from all across Oshawa to push forward. We're going to be signing petitions, asking people to sign the petition to nationalize General Motors and to retool it for electric vehicles. And then we're going to be delivering them to the MPPs in the area, as well as a member of parliament. So we've got 2 planned so far this weekend, and we're going to have many more. We really see this as the birth of a coalition to push for this. So this Saturday, we're going to be out at 1 p.m. at the South Oshawa Community Center. And Tiffany, remind me of the address of that?
It is on...
It's okay, I'll ask you another local soon. But to do that, we're going to have people out. We're going to have postal workers, Unifor members, retirees, and others from the community. So I'm going to get Ellen, my counterpart in the campaign, to hold up your hand back there. So Ellen and myself and many others are leading on the Saturday canvas. So if you want to see this idea happen, we need you to come out and talk to people and door knock with us for about an hour and a half. We're going to go, we're going to have food afterwards, we'll have a drink, but we're going to be building this coalition, and we'll be matching people with partners. So if you're new to canvassing, it'll be really easy. You'll be able to walk through it. And then we'll be getting those petition signatures to later deliver to people like Jennifer to ask for her to present in the legislature saying, this is what I want to see happen. So this Saturday, Ellen, hold up your hand, please.
1455 Cedar Street.
1455 Cedar Street at the South Oshawa Community Center with Ellen right there. And then Kathy. We've got Kathy on Sunday, as well as myself. We're going to have both days to canvass. And on Sunday, we've got the day of mourning here. And so afterwards, we're going to be out door knocking and building up workers' power to actually make this happen. So we're going to be meeting at 2:30 p.m. And we chose to do this because for the day of mourning, the slogan is, of course, you mourn the dead for the dead, but fight like hell for the living. So after the day of mourning at 2:30 p.m., we're going to be meeting at the library at 2:30 p.m. and door knocking around there. Say again?
I know that address. 65 Baggett Street.
65 Baggett Street. So Sunday, 2:30 p.m. at the library. The address one more time, Tiffany?
65 Baggett Street, right next to
65
City
Baggett
Hall.
Street. And then on Saturday at 1:30 p.m. at the South Oshawa Community Center. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to go to whichever one you can make and go and give your contact information to either Ellen or Kathy, or as we're milling about afterwards, talk about other actions and other days that could work for you. Question?
Can you send that petition to everyone who came here today who gave their emails so that we can take it into our workplaces? Because I can't come to those things.
Okay, thank you for, because I failed to mention that there are various sign-in sheets going around the table. If you didn't get one, please make sure that we have your information, because if we have your email address, then James, can we follow up with the petition?
Yep.
Cool.
Good question.
Any other questions before we actually get into it?
And then before people scurry off to sign up for their action, because I have a feeling that it'll be hard to come back after we do our sign-ups, I just want to encourage folks, as we're milling about and ending, you do see on your table a spectrum of allies. If you have a chance while you're chatting with folks at your table to doodle or write down anyone that you know who may be active supporters, so they would be listed on the plus side of the flip chart, and then anyone who you would think would be active opposers, they would be on the negative side of the flip chart. Just so, and we'll collect them afterwards and just use the data, kind of what we're thinking, who we need to reach out to when we're looking at this. So you don't have to do it, but there's markers on your table. If you have any ideas, please list it there. So once again, if you want to just tell people the two sides, and then we're good to go.
So, yeah, Ellen is over there to the left of the door, and Kathy, if you can mind moving just a little bit to my right of the door. And then come find us and help us start the coalition to take back the net GM plant, and workers' power. And I encourage you to mill about, talk about other strategies, allies to move on board. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and it was a great evening, and thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much to our panelists.